We are going to start with the spin-offs, everybody. So anybody just joining, we are ranking these from S all the way down to F, S being the best and F being fails. And we're going to start with our very first spin-off. And this one came into play very early on in the franchise, and that is Resident Evil Survivor. Resident Evil Survivor came out on the PlayStation 1, but RE Survivor takes place in a different town, a different city, that has also been infected by the T virus and the G virus. And it's all new characters, and it's widely considered one of the worst entries in the Resident Evil franchise. If you thought the voice acting was bad in the original Resident Evil, go ahead and listen to some of the dialogue in Resident Evil Survivor, and this one takes the cake. The other big thing about this game is that many people think the first time Resident Evil went first person was RE7. It turns out it was this one, back on the PS1. This is a first-person game, and you're utilizing a D-pad on the PS1 controller and trying to work your way through a survival horror game in first person, and you have very limited inventory, and you have an interesting combat style where you have to stop, and when you aim, now you're moving a target around the screen to try to shoot the zombies. The good thing about it is these enemies in the game do have weak points, especially when it comes to headshots. So if you get really good at aiming in the game, you can nail those headshots and do really well in the game. So it gets pretty exciting if you get good at it. This game was supposed to feature the light gun support. In North America, that never happened. You were always stuck with the controller. But from what I understand, the European release of this and possibly the Japanese release of this did allow for the light gun support, the gun that was on the PS1. I would actually enjoy this game a lot more if I was able to use that blaster, but I can't, and you stick to the controller. Now, this is a game I have revisited several times ever since it came out. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to go through. The story is somewhat interesting. It's not great. It's a very short game compared to the rest, and its challenge mostly comes from problems controlling it. So it can be a very frustrating experience. So Resident Evil Survivor, I'm going to put this back into the tile here. Resident Evil Survivor, believe it or not, it's not the worst. It's definitely not the worst, and I'm not going to put Survivor all the way down in an F. But where I am going to place it is an E. So it didn't quite completely fail. It almost did, because believe it or not, there is a far worse title. First one on the tier list, Resident Evil Survivor. I'm rating that E level. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Do you agree with this placement for Resident Evil Survivor? All right, guys. Moving on. Sticking with the Survivor games. This is actually our exception. This is the one I was mentioning before. And this is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Now, the reason I'm calling this an exception is because Survivor 2 was not officially released here in North America, where I am. So I never got to have an official copy of this game. The only way I've ever been able to play this was on some form of like a ROM or a ROM hack. And with that said, it's a very different experience than the actual game itself. So Survivor 2 continues the idea of it being a first-person shooter style. And it's still considered survival horror, but this time around, instead of doing its own story, it follows Code Veronica. So you're playing as Claire Redfield and Steve Burns, and, you know, you work your way through the story of Code Veronica, which was kind of cool, being able to see that game in a different point of view and play out differently. The other, you know, the really cool thing is that these two characters are with each other practically the whole time. So it's a very interesting way to go through Code Veronica. The problem is, I never got to have an official release of this game, so that's why I'm considering this an exception. But I still wanted to include it because I still technically played it. Now, When it comes to Survivor 2, I think it is leaps and bounds better than the first Survivor game in many aspects. One, the graphics look a lot better because this did come out later, and this came out. This is the PS2 generation when this came out. It was based on Code Veronica, which we already know is a solid story, so you know you're going to enjoy the story going into it, and getting to see a different point of view from all the characters you play as in it, and a different way of running through. It's more action oriented. Again, you move the cursor around to shoot, but this was also a game that when it was released did allow support for the light gun. So this became an actual shooter. It's basically like an on-rail shooter for the most part. The thing I experienced with it was, and I don't know if this is how it is in the actual release of the game, but the version I played, all I was really doing was moving forward. Like, I have some movement choices and I'm pretty much moving forward, but it felt like for the most part, the game was kind of shooting for me. Like, I don't think I was actually manually shooting. It was like I'd move into position and then the characters would start shooting at the enemies. Now, I don't know if that's actually how the real release played, or if this was just something that was going on in the ROM hack I was playing that was just somebody adapted it and changed the way it controls. So I don't have a true first-person experience with this game. I've only played it where it's been altered in some way. I did have fun with it, but that said, it was one of those like unnecessary versions of the game. I didn't need to play Code Veronica a different way like that. I still consider Survivor 2 to have been better than Survivor 1. The question is it on the same tier level as Survivor? Or do I actually bump Survivor 2 up to a D level? It's definitely not in a top 4 level. I'm kind of thinking it's same tier level. Like, the two Survivor games go together, and even though they're a bit of a different experience overall, I think my overall experience with it is kind of on the same baseline. It's like, I'll only come back to these sometimes. Did I have some enjoyment with them? A little. But again, it is not the worst in the series, in my opinion. All right, moving on to our next spin-off. This one is another interesting game, and this is one that I have played multiple times, and I am still to this day trying to get a legit official copy of it into my collection. This one has been tough to get, and that is Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy Color. This game has kind of a mixed response from fans. Now, it is a Game Boy game, so graphics-wise and gameplay-wise, it's going to be very limited. What they chose to do with this game is kind of interesting, and I think that's what drew me into it. I think that's what really sparked my interest. When I first saw glimpses of this game, I see it like kind of looks like a top-down view, and you get to play as Leon. Barry is in this game as well, and the story is pretty interesting. But how do you play a Resident Evil game on the Game Boy, especially the earlier Game Boys? This is the Game Boy Color, but still the same graphic level as the regular Game Boy. They just added some colors to it. What they did with it was, as you move around this top-down view, this bird's eye view, what they ended up doing for the combat was, as you encounter a zombie or a monster, it switches to a first-person view, and you see the monster basically coming towards you, and the animation changes a little bit, and the monster is slowly approaching, and there's a meter going back and forth on the bottom of the screen, and there's a target on that meter, and as that slider is going, you want to try to hit the shoot button as you hit that point, like it's usually like right in the middle, and it moves at varying speeds, and the whole thing is a timing game. It's all about timing. So the slider's going back and forth, and you want to time it to hit that target to land your shot on the monster. Hit the target enough times and accurately hit the monster, and you win the battle. If you miss too many times, not only are you running out of ammunition, that monster's going to get you, and you are dead. So it has a whole different aspect to the idea of survival horror, and it puts an interesting spin on the way you play Resident Evil. Now, this was one that I overall enjoyed this game. A lot of people did not, and I can understand why. It's a strange departure from the normal that we know in the world of Resident Evil. I still overall enjoyed it, and it's a game that I would like to revisit more often. But getting a copy of this game, or I should say, getting a legit copy of this game, is very difficult, and when you find them, they are wildly expensive, especially if you find it complete in box. Oh my god, you got to be willing to drop a pretty penny on that one. Now I need to figure out, where do I place Resident Evil Gaiden on this tier list? It's such a mixed view of this game. So the question is, where would I personally put this? Because that's what this comes down to. It's, where am I personally going to place this game? Because it's about my experience with the game. And it's one of those ones that I wish I could just play more often. Certainly not the best, but far from the worst. I'm actually going to put Gaiden, because it was such a fun, different experience. I think I'm going to put that in a C level. I think this is going to be our first C entry here. Resident Evil Gaiden. I did have a good time with that game, and I know it's very different from the rest, but I think overall it's a good entry that I would recommend any Resident Evil fan to at least give it a shot. Let's talk about Dead Aim. Let's bring this out here. This was an interesting release on the PlayStation 2. This is another entry in the franchise that is very mixed with fan reception. PlayStation 2, we get Resident Evil Dead Aim. The cool thing about this game was it was both third person and first person as you navigate this basically this big, was it a cruise ship? I'm trying to remember, was it a cruise ship, or was it some sort of... It wasn't a military ship, it was a cruise ship, wasn't it? As you navigate this ship, you're in third person. As you go around, you're searching, you're looking for items, just like you would. You're opening doorways, all that stuff. All your standard Resident Evil elements are there. But when you aim and go into combat, that's when it switches to first person. And then from there, that's where the option comes into play of either use the controller for the aiming as well, or use the gun con. And that's where people had a blast with stuff like this, because then you're getting the best of both worlds. So it's very interesting in the gameplay mechanics and how the game itself is presented. Dead Aim also features a whole bunch of brand new characters. We do see some new creatures, but we do see some elements of creatures that we've known in the past. But for the most part, we're getting a lot of new creatures and brand new characters, though we get mentioned of Leon and stuff like that. There are throwbacks to the other characters. There's mentions of things in files, because yes, you want to look for files and read about the story points that you may have missed. That's, so a lot of people do skip them. If you're new to Resident Evil, I highly recommend collecting and reading the files that you find along the way. There is so much lore and backstory, and it just adds to the experience in such a positive way. So definitely read those files, because some of them are fan favorites. So Dead Aim, again, a bit of a departure from what we knew in the past, and they tried something new with it. And it was one of those things that it kind of came and went. This one got mixed reviews from fans. This is one, though, that overall, every time I sit down to play Dead Aim, I have a good time. I enjoy the game. I have a really good time with this one. It is a little tricky to get used to. You are going back and forth between third person and first person, but once you get the feel for it, you find a surprising level of comfort with it, right? It's like many games. It just takes a little bit of playing for a little while, and then you're just in the zone. And then you know what the game wants you to do, and you're working your way through. It gets overlooked a lot in the Resident Evil community, and I don't think it deserves to be overlooked. I think this is one that deserves a little more love than it gets. So the question is, where do we place Dead Aim on this tier list? Now, I do appreciate what it was trying to do, and I think that it overall, I think Dead Aim did accomplish, for the most part, what they set out to do. Not the best story in the franchise, but still an interesting one. It gets a little strange at times, but it's an interesting story altogether, and also an interesting gameplay experience. And with that said, and this is with me also keeping some other titles in mind, I would say Dead Aim is actually, for me, it's a mid-tier experience. So I'm going to place Dead Aim with Gaiden. Very different experiences, but that's not really what it's about. It's not about the same type of gameplay. It's really just about my personal experience with the game. You know, how often do I come back to it, and did I enjoy it each time that I play it? I was considering placing Dead Aim at B, but I feel like Dead Aim is it's riding right down the middle, and that's not a bad thing. All right, moving on with our spin-offs. The next ones I want to talk about here are Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. I'm considering it 1. I didn't split it. Reason being is that File 2, it's like it's a full continuation. Like I consider both Outbreak games to be kind of one big experience. Resident Evil Outbreak, again, another time where Capcom was trying something new, and it really only happened, for the most part, this one time in this sense. So Resident Evil Outbreak, one of the reasons I really enjoy this is that it takes place in Raccoon City during the outbreak, and it's happening at the same time as the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Raccoon City is being infested by zombies and monsters. The T-Virus, the G-Virus, everything is happening. The city is just like imploding on itself. And in this game, you don't play as any of our main characters that we've played as before. You're playing as these, what feel like just to be random citizens of Raccoon City. One of them is a reporter who we will be revisiting really soon in Resident Evil 9 RE Requiem. And then there's multiple other characters. Everybody has, a different job you hear about. There's, I forget the character's name, but she actually worked for Umbrella, or was let go from Umbrella. I'm trying to remember. Was she let go from Umbrella? She worked for Umbrella at some point. But there's a whole bunch of ties into the Umbrella Corporation in this one, and it's set up in the style of the original 3 games. So it's tank controls. There's a little more camera movement in it, so it feels very similar to Code Veronica in the way the camera moves with the character a little bit, but eventually it switches over to another static cam and different points of view. Now, this game was multiplayer. And what this did was it utilized the PlayStation 2's ability to go online if you had the Ethernet adapter attached, which I did. And I could go online and team up with multiple players playing as all the different characters, and we would try to get through this game together. Here was the kicker. There was no voice chat. Every character had an emote of some sort. You could emote, and that was your way of communicating with your team. And it would be things like, look over here, or pick this up, or help, or something like that. And that was the only way you could communicate with your team. But this was an enhancement to the overall experience of playing a Resident Evil game. And then File 2 continues the story on with these characters, and all happening during the outbreak in Raccoon City. Playing as different citizens of Raccoon City, getting their point of view of what's going on. There's even moments where you run into Marvin Brenna, the officer who was injured you find in Resident Evil 2, and then unfortunately Marvin turns into a zombie himself. And but we get to see what happened to him beforehand. And he's trying to help people and get people into the police station and barricade doors and all this stuff. It was really cool to see his character like that. And then being on the PS2 hardware, we had some pretty darn good graphics in this game. It was a lot of fun seeing Raccoon City look so good. Now, the other element of this game that made it stand out, again, Capcom trying different things. As you got injured from the zombies and the monsters, Well, it's Resident Evil, right? So think about it. What would happen if a zombie bit you? You're infected. And that's exactly what happens. You get bit, your character is now infected. And there's a meter going. This little like thing looks like a bunch of cells like in a microscope. And that shows your infection level. And if it gets too high, eventually your character will turn. And then that was one of the most amazing things I had ever seen in any Resident Evil game. Not only does your character turn, but it's not game over. You're still controlling that character. And now your character is a zombie that you are controlling. And for a limited amount of time, you can go after your former teammates. And holy moly, that created mayhem. Resident Evil Outbreak, both of those games brought a whole new level to the survival horror elements to it. And having it be multiplayer, you're now there with friends and you're meeting people, or at least trying to. You're only emoting, you can't voice chat with them. But I have heard that there are fan-run servers these days where you can get the PS2 emulators and get the ROM of Resident Evil Outbreak. And on those servers, there is voice chat. I haven't done it. I haven't set any of that up. But perhaps one day I will set that up to try it out, because there are people literally right now as we speak playing Resident Evil Outbreak with each other. Where do I place Outbreak? Now, the game has its flaws. It's a little wonky. It's a little stiff at times with the controls. It can be very tough to get through, but it's very doable. There are major difficulty spikes in it. And if you are playing multiplayer, some of those difficulty spikes are lessened, but for the most part, I played this solo, and it can get pretty tough. But Outbreak, I feel like it's set a different bar, and that's a bar that fans have been screaming for to come back. Fans have been calling for an Outbreak remake or a remaster or something for literally decades at this point. And we don't have it. And I don't know if we ever will. I think Outbreak and Outbreak File 2 set a bar that fans want to see reached again and then surpassed. And with that being said, I'm going to place Outbreak at a level A. We're going to tier level A for this is going to be Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. I combined it because I consider those two games one big experience. So that's in there. So Outbreak and Outbreak 2, tier level A. That's what I'm going with. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. What do you think about the placement of Resident Evil Outbreak? What are your memories of that game? Did you enjoy it? Is this something you would like to see come back in the world of Resident Evil? Moving on with our spin-offs, I'm going to move on to the Umbrella Chronicles. Now, this was a game. Now, there are two of these games, but I have them separated. Unlike Outbreak, where I combined them, I do have these separated because I do feel one is better than the other. Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. This came out on the Nintendo Wii and also on the PlayStation 3. Both versions utilizing the motion controllers. So the Wii had the Wiimotes and the PlayStation 3 had their PlayStation Move controllers. It was those weird like stick controllers and had the light up orb on the top of it. And each one of those systems would have adapters. You put the controller in it, you turn it basically into a blaster. And you know what? That's exactly what they wanted you to do with these games, because Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles is an on-rail shooter in an arcade style. And what this does is it reimagines Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 and puts it into an arcade style on-rail shooter. And then there's an additional mission that takes you outside of the story with a brand new story following Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. And I think they travel to Russia in that one. And it's all on-rail shooter. So if you're using the motion controllers, you're moving the target around the screen and shooting at the zombies and the monsters that they come at you. And like any other arcade on-rail shooter, for the most part, you're not controlling the movement. It's taking you through the game and you're shooting at enemies as you go. Every once in a while, you get a choice to choose a direction, left or right, and then that'll kind of take you off in a little bit of a different path. But for the most part, you're in a controlled path as you go through these. The really cool part about it is multiplayer. So teaming up with a partner, if you're playing Resident Evil 0 in Umbrella Chronicles, you're playing as both Rebecca and Billy at the same time. It even has the classic boss battles from those games, and it breaks up these games into little episodes. So you're working your way through, getting extra points, finding hidden items all over the place. Like you could shoot the chandeliers and stuff and find hidden files, unlocking high scores, which then unlocks more powerful weapons. If you like arcade on-rail shooters and you're a fan of Resident Evil, the Umbrella Chronicles is a really fun experience. Now, with that said, technically it's not a canon entry because it does change some things, right? Because it's forcing the characters together, so it alters the story. But for the most part, if you wanted a quick run through of the story just to get the basic idea of what happened in that game, Umbrella Chronicles is a pretty cool way of going about that. Umbrella Chronicles being an arcade on-rail shooter, where would I place this? This particular one, this was a game I do revisit fairly often. I enjoy it every single time. I play it multiplayer with my son now. We've gone through it and beaten it. And I have save files for this on the Wii where I got so many things unlocked. I got save files the same way on the PS3 with tons of stuff unlocked. So you can go in and have, infinite ammo and all that stuff. And it's a lot of fun. A very different experience from the overall normal experience of Resident Evil. I'm actually going to give this a B tier rating. This is one I revisit very often. For the most part, I play it on the Wii because I normally have that system set up more often than I do the PS3. So, and dealing with the Wiimotes, I feel like is easier than the PlayStation Move controllers. So, Umbrella Chronicles, I'm putting that at B tier. I have a blast with that game, and it features a bunch of my favorite moments in Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1. It's just a wild ride and so much fun to play multiplayer. Now, with that said, its sequel, Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, follows Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and then missions with Leon and Krauser. Krauser is the character we met in Resident Evil 4 that we basically, at that time, got no information about. I played through Resident Evil 4 so many times, and I came out of that game knowing pretty much nothing about Krauser. Well, this game gets you not only some backstory on him, but you also find out why he is the way he is by the time you see him in Resident Evil 4. This game, Dark Side Chronicles, filled in the gaps that was missing in RE4. And for that reason alone, this game became one of my all-time favorites in the franchise. Now, with that said, the biggest reason why I absolutely love this game, and I should say, same style, on-rail shooter. It's like an arcade game. Play a two-player. The whole idea, same as Umbrella Chronicles. The graphics are better. They amped it up. It got better on this one, so it looks so good. But the thing that got me and put this game over for me was the Resident Evil 2 moments. And here's why. As many of you know, Resident Evil 2 is not only my favorite game in the Resident Evil franchise, it's my favorite game ever. And Dark Side Chronicles is our first glimpse at what a remake of Resident Evil 2 could have been.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill
Yes,
sandwich.
thank you, Ted, for using the sound effects. This game showed us it pretty much is. It pretty much is a remake of Resident Evil 2. And that blew me away. I know it was a completely different style. It's a first-person on-rail shooter. But the graphics were amped up and the characters were together. Claire and Leon going through the RPD together. It was just it blew me away. I could, and like the Code Veronica section is fantastic too. It's you know, a different voice actor for Steve Burns also, so he's not as whiny. It's which is a plus. But getting that first glimpse, I was like, oh my god, this is what it could be. This is what we could get. This is what RE2 could potentially look like. And it wouldn't be until years and years later that we actually got an RE2 remake. But this was our first real glimpse at it. You get little moments in Outbreak of familiar spots from RE2, but it wasn't on this level. This level was a whole other game. This was game changer. So Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles, where do we put this on the list? Darkside Chronicles, I'm actually going to put this above Umbrella Chronicles. I think it amped it up, and I think Darkside Chronicles deserves an A tier. When it comes to spin-offs, I think Darkside Chronicles earns a really high spot on this list. I wouldn't say it's a perfect game, but man, is it fun. And if you're in the mood for an arcade-style shooter, and you're a fan of Resident Evil, I highly recommend Darkside Chronicles. It's great, and it features some of my favorite story moments in the whole thing. So, Darkside Chronicles gets an A tier. I think that's a pretty comfortable spot for that. All right, we are working our way through the spin-offs here. Our next spin-off is, this is a quick one. Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D on the Nintendo 3DS. This game is pretty much what it says it is. It's the Mercenaries mode. Specifically, the Mercenaries mode that we got in Resident Evil 5, except this has a bit of enhancements. There's a little bit more to it. So, you know, it's not a direct copy of what you played in RE5. There's a little more to it. And then being on the 3DS, they utilize the ability to play it in 3D. But for the most part, this is basically just like almost an arcade style action shooter. It's in third person. You're running around and there's waves of enemies and you're getting points and there's timers to going through and there's enhancements you get along the way. And you're basically just trying to clear the area as fast and efficiently as you can. So there's really nothing too crazy about this game. I wouldn't say there's anything real special about it either. I don't play the mercenary modes often in the games that they're featured in. You know, there's a mercenaries mode all the way back in RE3, which that's probably the one I played the most because you have to play through that to unlock the bonus weapons for your later playthroughs. So mercenaries mode in RE5 though was a lot of fun. It wasn't anything too special. So the question is where do I put Mercenaries? Me personally, it's not one of my go-to things. I think it's fun, especially being a handheld thing on the 3DS. It is a fun experience, but it's nothing special to me, and it's not anything I come back to often. But I wouldn't put this as low as Survivor. So I think this is going to be our first D-ranked game here. Not that I have really anything against Mercenaries 3D. I just don't have a whole lot of love for that game. Like, it's not one that I seek out to play often. So that's going to be our first D-level ranking. Now, our next spin-off is another heavily mixed experience with the fans. Operation Raccoon City is about as spin-off gets. It's pretty much a what-if scenario because this game heavily alters certain moments in the canon story. And that's one of the big reasons why a lot of people do not like this game. Other reasons people don't like this game is that gameplay elements and how it plays, it's not their, like, I don't know, what's the phrase? Not their cup of tea for, this style of games. But Operation Raccoon City, you actually play as an elite group that works for Umbrella. And each one of these characters has their own abilities. They're more efficient in certain things than others. Like one character is like really great at stealth, and then the other one is like a big Hulk guy and everything, and it's very powerful. You play the game in third person. It's a run and gun shooter, and then there's some melee combat in there. Imagine Resident Evil got mixed with something like Call of Duty, like it's a very action oriented. And the story is this group hired by Umbrella is going through the city to basically be the cleanup crew. Now, at the same time, the events of RE2 and RE3 are happening. So they eventually run into moments from the other games, and that's where things get changed. But this game is not canon. So that being the case, I kind of like having the what if scenario. It's fun. It can be a lot of fun seeing the what if this happened instead of that. And each character is pretty fun to play as. Now, the gameplay itself is a little clunky. Movement is rough. You know, your character wants to move a certain way, but if you bump into obstacles, you really get held up, and it can be tricky to continue moving, especially in moments where you're trying to sprint. And yes, you can sprint in this game, and then you can slide, all while shooting at the same time. And then there's moments where Mr. X is going to show up, and you even find Nemesis along the way. You have a run-in with Leon. You have run-in with a whole bunch of characters. You run into William Birkin. In fact, one of my favorite moments of this game happens pretty early on, where you meet up with Hunk, who was going in with his team to obtain the G-Virus from William Birkin. And you get, if you guys remember in RE2, that big cutscene of Mrs. Birkin telling Ada what happened with her husband, you basically see the other point of view of that. So you kind of get to play that moment, and it's pretty cool. But this is a very action-oriented game. This is not survival horror. You are a soldier, you're running through, and not only are you fighting monsters, but you also are fighting other soldiers, because there were the mercenaries that were hired also, like Carlos was part of that team, and Nikolai and all them. That side, they're out there, and if you run into them, you have to fight them. So there's a lot of the game where you're not fighting monsters and zombies, you're fighting other soldiers, and they are shooting back at you and throwing grenades, and it's crazy. It's just mayhem. That said, the experience itself is a lot of fun, at least in my opinion. It's a game I come back to often when I'm in the mood for it, to just be in the world of Resident Evil, but looking for a little more action. It's one of those games that I feel like its flaws outweigh its pros. And with that being said, I think Operation Raccoon City for me is going to land right in the middle, and it's going to be one of our C tier entries here. We are moving into, I didn't put these as mainline, but they are borderline mainline. So I bet as far as the spin-offs go, these are as close to reaching into the mainline series as it gets. And I'm going to talk about Resident Evil Revelations. So the first one initially came out on the 3DS. And this was a handheld game at the time of its initial release. At that time, I did not have a 3DS, but not too long after, it did get ported to the PlayStation 3, and that's when I got to play it. The cool thing about it being on the 3DS, which I do have it now, is it uses the 3D element, and they utilize it for the gameplay specifically. And it's got those dual screens where you're moving your inventory and using a scanner and all this stuff, and it worked very well on the 3DS. That said, it also works very well on a main console, on like the PS3. Resident Evil Revelations brings us back to playing as Jill Valentine, and then along the way in the story, you get to reprise playing as Chris Redfield, and then there are a bunch of new characters. And this is towards the beginning of the storyline where we are meeting the BSAA group. It starts going into fighting bioterrorism across the world. And this specialized group, the BSAA, which we learn more about in Resident Evil 5 and 6, we see that they go on all kinds of different missions. And we find out about this experimental town that's like this island off the shore of the mainland. And there was a huge accident there where the T-Virus got out and G-Virus, and it just got infested by monsters to the point where they used a satellite weapon and basically fried that town. And there's a whole conspiracy thing going on, heavy conspiracies in this storyline for Revelations. But the really fun part is that you're coming back to two of our main heroes that started it all, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. And then the new characters we meet along the way are actually really well done characters. They're pretty fun. There's even two characters that they're kind of the comic relief a little bit in it, so it gets a little silly at a point, but it's not too bad. It doesn't pull you out of it too far. It's a whole side story. It's not really about Umbrella. Like, you're getting a lot more information about these competing companies that are similar to Umbrella, and they want what Umbrella has and want to replicate things or do their own thing with it. But what it all comes down to is fighting bioterrorism across the world. So the biggest standout of this game is learning about the BSAA and where our main heroes from the first game went after everything had happened in the Spencer Mansion and all of that. So Revelations, very cool storyline, very cool gameplay. It is a third-person, over-the-shoulder shooter style, very similar to RE5. The control mechanics are very smooth for the most part. And the new element into it is using a scanner to find items. That element can become tedious and a little annoying at times, but after a while of playing, you find yourself not having to do it as much because you've already collected a whole bunch of things, so then you can kind of lean away from doing the scanner. So the question is, where does Resident Evil Revelations land in the ranking? This is a game that I have a lot of fun with, and whenever I'm starting to reach the world of Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, I like to throw the Revelation games in the mix in my replay. Revelations is a really solid game, whether you're playing it on the 3DS or on the PS3, or I think it was on the Xbox 360 as well. I think this game's a lot of fun, and I'm going to give this a B ranking here. Its sequel, Revelations 2, we veer away from the storyline that was in that first one, and we reprise playing as Claire Redfield, which is awesome. We also get to meet Barry Burton's daughter, and she is the alternate character to play as, and she's going alongside Claire. So you're playing as Claire and Barry's daughter. Then you get to later chapters, and you actually get to play as Barry Burton, which is amazing. The legendary Barry Burton, you actually get to play as him. And in his half of the story, things get really, for lack of a better term, supernatural. Things get very, very interesting in that one. It's a little weird, but the thing I liked a lot about Resident Evil Revelations 2 is that it brought in a new level of fear. They went for this game to be scary. Revelations was still a bit more action-oriented. Revelations 2 leaned into the horror, and the set pieces in this game, the environments that you're in, are dark, they're eerie, they're dangerous. The enemies in this game are very powerful. You have to conserve your ammo very well in this game. You're using instead of having a scanner in this one, you're using your flashlight to try to find items, and the light will shine on it and it will start to blink, and then you can go pick it up. So kind of keeping with the scanner element from the first one, except toning it down a bit, and now you're just using the flashlight. The other cool thing is that you can use the flashlight sort of as a weapon. You can stun enemies. Certain enemies, you can blind them with the flashlight because you could put it into like a high power mode. It just gives this burst of white light, and you could take them out. So Revelations 2, another really fun entry as a spin-off game. But where would I put this on the tier list? I do think Revelations 2 is better than the first Revelations. Do I raise it above it in an A rank? I think I will. I think I'm going to give Revelations 2 an A rank. This one brought back the real feel of survival horror, and it legitimately had good scares in there. It was It was a solid good time there, with the horror itself. I think the story was well written and the graphics are fantastic. The gameplay style is great. I think the movement of the characters works very well in it. Getting to play as Claire again is awesome, and then getting to play as Barry, that's just a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun. All right, we have 3 more spin-offs here. These last 3. Oh boy. Okay, we're going to start with Resident Evil Resistance. Oh boy. This game was an add-on. It was a glimpse at almost the closest we had gotten, at least we thought it was going to be, the closest we have gotten to a Outbreak style. Again, random citizens of Raccoon City, and you're in there in a multiplayer style, and you can now, this time, you can actually communicate with each other. When this got teased, the first thing I thought was, oh my god, they're actually doing this in Outbreak style. This is going to be incredible. And then it came out, and it is far, far from being Outbreak. Resistance basically took the idea of like what's like the gameplay styles where it's like a one versus a group type games, like that Friday the 13th game that came out not that long ago. There's the Predator game, Hunting Grounds is like that. But the thing is, like, the one, you're in this like control center and you're basically the one setting up the traps in the area. You're sending out the monsters. You're basically the mastermind controlling this area, almost like a Saw movie. It's a very weird experience, and then each character has their benefits, has their strengths, has their weaknesses, and if you play in a group, you utilize all that together to try to work your way through, and there's items to find, and then you're eventually just trying to survive long enough and find the way out. Now, the idea on paper was kind of good, but in practice, this game, like, in my opinion, barely functioned. Such a confusing mess at times. The characters, in my opinion, all kind of sucked. There's nothing memorable about them. The funnest part of the game is playing as, like, the mastermind, setting up the traps and stuff, but that gets stale really quick. It didn't build a player base very much, like, at all, and it quickly died. At this time, Resistance is gone and will never come back. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any fun with it. At the start, I did have fun with it, and seemed interesting, and I believe there were plans to, like, enhance it as it went. Like, it was supposed to grow, and then it just didn't. So replayability really didn't come down to whether or not I wanted to play it anymore. It's just gone now. So Resistance is one of those experiences that this was almost an attempt at something good, and I'm not sure what they were thinking when it came to execution of this. So, does Resistance deserve a fail, or does it bump up to the same level with Survivor in an E? You know what? No. Resistance is our first fail. This game, not only did it fail as being a fun game in the Resident Evil franchise, but it failed as just being a game, and it's gone now. And the fact that it was removed, I think, earns it the F. I think that earns it the fail. Now, in a similar case, everybody, a similar case, Reverse. I played a lot of Reverse. It's gone now, but it lasted a hell of a lot longer than Resistance did. It's an online arena style game, arena battle. So you get a small map, and each player, you pick your character. Each character has their, pros and cons. Certain characters use certain weapons. Some characters are faster than others. Some are stronger than others. And you pick your starting hero character. And when you die, as let's say you're playing as Leon, and you get killed, you now spawn in as a monster. But depending on what upgrades you found along the way as your hero, you play as a different monster. You could end up playing as the Molded from RE7, or you could even play as Jack Baker. But then you could also play as Nemesis. You could play as a whole bunch of different creatures. And they all have their different powers. And some are stronger than others, some are faster than others. And you start going after the other players with your monster until eventually you're shot down. And then you spawn back in as your chosen hero. Reverse was a lot more fun than Resistance. It was also a lot more functional. It had an interesting style to it. You could toggle this. It had sort of a strange animation outline to the characters, and it almost looked like they were going for like a cell shading style to it. So it definitely looks different. It's like it took the remake graphics, but then toned them down, but then added this bold outline on the characters, almost comic book style. Now, the reason for the tone down in the graphics was because this was an online-only game. And I guess they wanted it to run as smooth as possible. So they toned down the graphics. And then you're thrown into this arena. And it's just run and gun and survive as long as you can. You get weapon upgrades. You find ammo along the way. You could find herbs to heal. All this stuff. But it didn't expand very quickly. So the levels that you're playing became very stale quickly. So it was losing its replay value. And that's where I think a lot of people started to fall off the ball with Reverse. It was a bit of a mess, and inevitably it failed. So Reverse, nowhere near as bad as Resistance, but nowhere near being a good game either. So I think Reverse is going to land as an E, and that's where it's going to place, which takes us to our final spin-off game, Resident Evil Umbrella Corps. Oh my goodness. I don't know what they were thinking when this game came out. Here's something this game has on the last two we just talked about. You know what Umbrella Corps has over Reverse and Resistance? It's still out there. And you can still play it. You could still buy it. In fact, I see this game go on sale every once in a while. It's still out there. This is by far, in my opinion, the strangest entry in the entire Resident Evil franchise. What can I say about this? Imagine playing in an arena battle style, small map, play as soldiers, set your armor, set your weapon, set your melee weapon, and then going after the enemies, not only the monsters, but the enemy players as well, whether you're playing free-for-all or team squad or team-based, and going until the timer runs out or whoever wins, by the end. It's an action shooter set. At least it's supposed to be set in the world of Resident Evil. They released multiple maps over time. Eventually, they added the village from Resident Evil 4, and it looked kind of cool. But let me tell you, the controls of this game are awful. It wants to move insanely fast at all times. And you can do all kinds of like slide moves, and you can crawl, you can sprint even faster than the normal run. And then the big weapon, you can see it on the picture there, the big weapon that they were promoting like crazy when this came out was that like hook blade that one guy in the back has on his arm. That was the big thing. It was like this big hook arced blade, and that was like that was your like go-to weapon in the game, which it turns out it actually is your go-to weapon. Forget the guns. Just go and hit with that blade. For the most part, on almost every enemy, it's a one-hit kill. It was just ridiculous, and players figured that out real fast. So it all came down to how quickly can you run up to another player and hit them. And that was it. It felt so unfair. And then every time you're fighting the monsters and you're gaining all these points and everything as you're killing the monsters, there was reasons to go after the zombies. They were more like just obstacles in your way of getting to the opposing team. Jeff says, I saw a physical copy of Umbrella Corps this weekend, brand new for $104, at least 103.51 overpriced. Oh my god. Brand new, factory sealed, over $100 for Umbrella Corps. This game is a disgrace, in my opinion. And look, I'm sure there are people who like this game, because there are still people playing this game to this day. For me, it did not land. It's not my style of a game, especially when it comes to Resident Evil. This was, in my opinion, a gigantic mess that they just slapped the Resident Evil label onto. And I bought it. I bought it because it was a new Resident Evil game coming out. And I feel like maybe it was just me. Maybe I wasn't paying attention enough. I almost feel like it was falsely advertised prior to release, because I thought, oh, I really liked Operation Raccoon City. I'm like, oh, this will be another game where you're playing from the point of view of Umbrella and going through some sort of a story and seeing Umbrella's point of view of how they're going to get through this mess, and maybe even take it into the later game stories after Raccoon City was destroyed. That's what I thought we were getting. And maybe that's probably on me. Maybe I didn't fully understand. Well, obviously, I didn't fully understand what I was actually getting myself into. And then the game released, and I was psyched. It was a brand new Resident Evil game. Bopped it on. And very, very, very quickly realized my mistake. And I even revisited this game after updates to see if it got better. And I feel like it actually got worse. I think, and another big problem with this game is that it's one of those games where I'm sure a bunch of cheaters got involved with it. So I think some of the game community kind of ruined it even further. But overall, Umbrella Corps is a gigantic waste of time in the franchise of Resident Evil. And for that, Umbrella Corps goes big time into the F tier. That game, wow. That is, It's just, it left such a bad taste in my mouth. That game was awful. Alright guys, that is our spin-offs from the Resident Evil franchise. Thank you so much for watching that video. Be sure to click that like button and stick around for more content like this right here.